My name is Dean Ramsden. I am a therapeutic energy healer, and this is episode 5 of my review of Hands of Light, a classic in energy healing circles that applies not only Barbara's specific structure of the human energy field, her ways of working with the client in a therapeutic way, but also introduces various frequencies, various ways of accessing the healing process that are very helpful. So if you've studied Qigong, if you're a Reiki master, if you have different forms of healing that you practice or have studied, Hands of Light, what I tend to call Hands of Light healing, Barbara calls it Brennan healing science. This form of healing has very specific and some very advanced features. So we're going through her first book, Hands of Light, and we're cherry picking out important pieces. Obviously, there's a lot of material in her book. I can't cover everything. And this is much more of a personal commentary than it is an accurate review of the book. So join me as we jump into this next piece. We're at page 13 of Hands of Light, where Barbara is talking about the process that she went through herself to learn how to do the form of healing that eventually she came to teach to others. And we can also glean from this hints and hopefully some encouragement for our own process as healers, given our individual circumstances, our own unique background. So let's turn to Hands of Light, and as she writes, bottom of page 13, Barbara began her scientific career as an atmospheric physics researcher that she went on to do weather satellite instrumentation for NASA. And from there, she went on to study bioenergetic counseling, so core energetics. We talked about that in earlier episodes as how important that view, the core energetics and the pathwork guide material, is to Barbara's system. And if you do want to get deeper into Barbara Brennan's whole system, if you go to her school or you study from outside, then looking at pathwork guide material is essential, I think, and perhaps doing some core energetic process work will definitely give you the practical experience of some of these themes that we'll get into later on in these episodes, especially around character structure and the healing response to character structure defenses, or to look at it from a different perspective, how to bypass habitual restrictions or habitual perceptions of each human being has of reality or their illness system, and how to put in place something that works much better, helps you evolve and progress through whatever you're dealing with. Could be an illness, could be just your personal growth, your personal evolution. Many people went through and continue to go through the Barbara Brennan School of Healing as seeing it as giving them tools to process their life, to deal with life traumas, to deal with life circumstances, to make the right choices for themselves, to advance their perception. Now, for Barbara, as we've talked about in earlier episodes, her term high sense perception is a combination of clairvoyance, seeing beyond the normal range of human vision, clairaudience, listening, hearing for that which is helpful to you, either your own intuition, hearing your own inner voice, or hearing your own spirit guide or other guides that may come to you and want to tutor you or teach you or guide you in a certain direction. And finally, the ability, as I spoke of earlier, to modulate your energy hands, to adjust frequencies, expand frequencies, and interact with the client or yourself to open up potential, open up personal evolution, to grow, basically, your human energy field. So, back to Barbara, giving us hints here. She writes about her training in deep relaxation techniques. Now, this for you may be your yoga practice. It may be a meditation practice. Anything that really gets you into your physical body, gets you comfortable under your skin, gets you engaged with being a physical human being. You don't want to just think about energy healing. It would be easy just to interact as an energy being, but for a full therapeutic healing response, we have to include the body. We have to include relational energies and relationships in our lives. More of that later. So Barbara writes about her 5 years of pathwork helpership training, and as I pointed out in an earlier episode, I feel myself this was Barbara's impetus to develop a therapeutic healing, because as a helper, as a pathwork helper, you guide others in a journey towards self-discovery, and you support the person you're working with as they confront things that hopefully you have confronted, issues that you've had to solve in your own life, and you act as a mentor, you act as a spiritual director in some cases, to guide, support, and verify the experiences of the client. Usually we turn to our friends or our family for verification. Often not a good idea. So much better to, I think, to choose someone who has training in professional helpership, whether it's psychotherapy, whether it's an alternative to traditional psychotherapy, such as, in my case, Hakomi, body-centered psychotherapy. There are many ways in which you can, or your helper can, gain the information they need, the training they need to help you and guide you, just as I have been guided and trained in my professional career, and still am. So Barbara writes, she also worked with various healers, other healers, of course, the most prominent being Rosalind Bruyere, one of my main teachers. And it is from our teachers that we first get trained, secondly get some kind of verification that you're doing it right or mostly right. You also train with other healers alongside you. You get companionship, you get colleagues. For me, working at the Bob Brennan School of Healing was incredibly enriching, because I rubbed shoulders with and worked with some incredible colleagues, other teachers, and for me it was and continues to be pivotal to doing this kind of healing work. You don't really want to be isolated. You don't want to be in a bubble. It just leads to dead ends and a lack of support, and probably depression as well if you get too isolated. So Barbara writes how, as she went through her training process, and she'll talk about it later on, how her own tutor guide, her teacher guide, Heowen, came through and gave her a lot of the structure that in the end ended up being in Hands of Light and other places, building on the previous information she'd learned from core energetics, so character structure, the flow of bioenergy, and of course certain therapeutic essentials she would also get from that. Building on her helper training, supporting other people moving through their personal process. And of course, we also learn by other people helping us, training us, mentoring us. So it's a two-way street. One of my teachers often joked that the only difference between a helper or a therapist and a client is that it's the helper or the healer that gets paid. But actually, it's a two-way street. Everyone is benefiting from the process of a therapeutic healing approach or a therapeutic verbal approach if you take away the hands-on healing aspect. Barbara also talked about her ability to speak with Hewen, her guide, and of course, you will have a guide, just as I have one or more guides, spirit helpers, a spirit team, if you would. In my case, there's a team of specialist guides that kind of rotate and come and go, and I guess they come and go because they've got things to do and places to go. But as a healer, as a trainee healer, you will, over time, of course, get the attention or get contact with your own spirit guide to help you and support you. And that's what Barbara inspires people to do when she talks, I think, about Hewen. There's also other spirit beings that were connected with Barbara, but we'll talk hopefully about that later when she writes about it. Barbara, because she had a counseling practice before, a core energetic and counseling practice before, found it easier to segue that into a hands-on healing practice. Now, for you or for other people, that may not be the case. You don't enter by having those credentials to begin with, but you can get them through training. You can either study with people who give you those skills, those credentials. So, for instance, I have a couple of therapeutic trainings that I draw from the Center for Intentional Living, where I studied with a group of very knowledgeable and very compassionate psychotherapists, and they handed over, they taught to us as healers some of the therapeutic skills and psychological training that everyone should have if you're working with someone. And I also studied Hakomi, which is a form of body-centered psychotherapy that includes dialogue, includes personal process with someone guiding them towards a helpful outcome. But of course, whatever your particular predilection is, your preference in psychotherapy, maybe it's like Barbara, you're coming out of a pathwork guide training, coming out of a core energetic or bioenergetic background. But there are so many more, including, of course, Reiki, Rosalind Bruyère's community of healers, and others that come and go, arrive and leave sometimes. Ideally, you look for some kind of consistency over time rather than a newcomer. That would be my recommendation. In the end, you're assembling your own set of skills, your own perspective. And one of the values of this book, Hands of Light, is that Barbara shows you how she assembled her version, how she put it all together from a rich diversity of sources and then practiced it in the field, actually worked with people. Her practice was only short, 5 years, before she gave up her private practice and went to teaching full-time. But what was built from that teaching practice spread out, helped other healers go from strength to strength. And if you didn't practice healing, as Barbara recommended you did, you could take those skills into your personal life and use it to heal yourself, your family, work with a relationship that was valuable to you, children, wives, husbands, even your animals, your beloved animals. Barbara writes, scattered throughout this book, you will hear dialogues of the inner child and the healer, counselor, physicist speaking. And so she's talking about the inner child, a very big concept back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s, the inner child being that younger, very vulnerable, very naive and innocent part of all of us that often makes assessments often makes assessments about reality that are not true. And part of our adult functioning, what we came eventually to call the spiritual adult, as opposed to spiritual child, that innocent child needs a guidance in releasing the past, releasing any shock or trauma, challenging memories from the past, and moving into an adulthood, a spiritual adulthood, a healthy adulthood. Especially so when you have a challenging upbringing, as many of us have. Mine was certainly full of challenges. Learning to overcome them, learning to deal with them in some way, process them. And out of that process, reassess, realign your life or your client's life with something that works better. And if there's a endpoint to Hands of Light healing, I think that's what you're looking for, that you come out of it more evolved, more like a spiritual adult and less like an injured child or a confused child. Barbara writes, this process will change your life, for you will find that you are fully and completely loved as you are right now in this moment. You are deserving and worthy of love. And I think those words especially ring true when we go to the deeper parts of our healing process and we realize that the real pain is the pain of separation, the pain of loss that has not been completed, the pain of being separate from an alive universe and from the resources that the universe offers us if we're willing to listen, if we're willing to be open, if we're willing to take it in, absorb it, integrate it. And in a few more episodes, we'll be into characterology, we'll be into these patterns of energy holding and energy manipulation that we all have, and use that material to refine the Hands of Light healing approach. Well, actually, you could use any healing approach, not just frequency adjustment and moving between the layers, as Barbara describes it, the layers of the energy body. So we're right here at the end of chapter 3. Barbara, in Hands of Light, often leaves little notes for her students to write about and then give as homework. There are review notes. So here we have chapter 3 review. What kind of technical training does a healer need? So if you were studying with Barbara back in the day, probably this would be part of your homework. She also adds here, number 2, what is the simplest form of guidance in your life? Now, this is not just a throwaway line. I think this is a good starting place for most of us. How do you, dear listener, gain guidance in your life? Do you get it from your dreams? Do you get it from talking to your friend? Do you read books, listen to music, and are inspired by the author, by the composer? Or do you do a process, as we're describing here, a therapeutic process where you go to someone to work on an issue or just to receive support? And that's a form of mentoring. That's a form of you gaining guidance, which is yours. Because remember that guidance is not advice. Guidance is not you submitting to an authority. Guidance is hearing and knowing the truth of something that you then allow to change you. You then allow to move you to a new place in your life. Then after the chapter review in Hands of Light, Barbara adds this food for thought piece. I guess another part of the homework process. So here we have, what are some of the more profound experiences of guidance you've had in your life? So here is a process that allows you to think about past events in your life where you received support. How did that support come? For many energy healers, they have experiences in their past where the spirit world has reached out to them and guided or given some helpful hint of a direction to move in, rather than the habitual place you would move through. Maybe when you're waking up after particularly deep sleep, you will hear something or a message will be given to you. Or maybe it's just a feeling of something shifting, an emotional change that allows you, like catching a wave when you're surfing, allows you to catch and ride that wave, ride it a certain distance, get a lot from a certain expansion. Maybe it's like that. So here is a classic Barbara Brennan invitation. Write about it. Put it down on paper. And if you're a big iPad user like I am, you can use your iPad, digitally write it down, draw it out. If that's not your thing, get a recorder, audio recorder, speak it. I have a wonderful program I use with my clients called Otter.ai, and basically it's a transcription program. And you can put in a recording, or in my case, I put in the recordings of my clients' sessions. And this software program will transcribe it mostly accurately. And you'll be able to read what you speak. And that allows you to talk and then later see your words, or the words of others for that matter, in writing. Now you have a different way of approaching and reviewing what's in there, what's wanting to come out and be seen. What is a form of guidance? So back to Hands of Light. Food for thought. Number 4, how well are you able to follow your guidance? Now that's a tricky one. How well are you able to follow your guidance? Most of us have to be trained to listen for guidance. In that process, we go through and have to face up to our authority issues, our issues over being told what to do and how to do it. And here we come to a really important piece of the therapeutic process, because we don't grow from someone telling us what to do and how to do it. Yes, that's a starting place. We grow from trying it out and seeing if it works for us. We grow and evolve by playing with it, messing with it, failing at it, trying a different approach, until eventually that guidance becomes real for us. Then at that point, it's in your emotional body. That guidance is a part of you. And that is the ideal way to help another person as a healer, as a helper, as a therapist, or actually just as a good friend, that you have actually walked the talk. You have actually gone through a process similar to what your client or your friend is going through or your family member is going through. And that allows you to support them, or him or her, in a effective way, in a way that is also compassionate of the process of being human, but also is realistic in terms of what needs to happen, what needs to change, what needs to grow. So these small little questions here in Hands of Light are little ways to train yourself to think and to see what's already there. And lastly, number 5, food for thought. Do you consciously listen for or ask for guidance for yourself, and how often? As a therapeutic energy healer, as a professional psychic, I have to listen. In fact, I have to do more listening than speaking. As someone who wants to be therapeutically useful and helpful to someone else, the listening aspect allows a magical process of energy exchange that awakens within the client or the friend a process of self-inquiry. In fact, it's that process of self-inquiry that is as much healing, has as much of a healing effect as running energy or frequency adjustment of energy or doing all this fancy energy work. Evoking and supporting a spirit of inquiry is 50% of the healing process, in my opinion. It's listening. It's also listening to yourself, but it's mostly listening to the client, reading what they send you, observing their energy field, their physical body, in my case, often over Zoom through potato cams. But you can pick up a lot of needed information through a combination of all these things. Tone of voice. I have a nice microphone because my voice will reach through the Zoom to my distant clients, and hopefully they'll get as much vibration, as much contact through the voice as they will from my camera that's set up here. Beyond the visual, beyond the auditory, is the feeling, the connection, that you are listening to another and listening to yourself, and that they go together. So there's your therapeutic process without even getting to running energy, without even getting to all the ins and outs of the human energy field. That's fundamental to the therapeutic healing process. So let's just bring this episode to a close. Let's move to the next one. So we're already into part 2, the human aura. Nice quote here from St. Augustine. Quote, "Miracles do not happen in contradiction to nature, but only in contradiction to that which is known to us in nature." And this actually is a nice segue into traditional magic and the esoteric traditions, which I'll talk about in other lectures, other book reviews. But it's a nice quote. Barbara writes here, "As we allow ourselves to develop new sensitivities, we begin to see the whole world quite differently. We begin to pay more attention to the aspects of experience that might have seemed peripheral before. we find ourselves using new language to communicate our new experiences. So again, Barbara's overarching theme of expansion of consciousness, expansion of perception, being willing to open up to something new. She writes, we begin to listen to our intuition. We know things, but we don't always know how we know. Intuition is complex but vital to this process of Hands of Light healing, to therapeutic energy healing, because very often our intuition, our visceral, non-verbal or non-conscious response gives us information. Another form of listening, intuition. Let's bring this episode to a close, because I do realize there's a lot of information here that Barbara will talk about, write about, referring to other healers and other scientists that give a sense of the energy body as being part of the physical body, emanating from the physical body. She talks about Dr. Robert Becker, who did some research around electrical fields and the healing process. She refers also to life, energy fields, thought fields, bioplasmic forms moving around. So one of the challenges of Hands of Light is that Barbara keeps throwing these things in and then develops them a little bit and then moves on. But in her defense, Hands of Light is basically meant, I think, to be used as a manual, as a teaching manual. You sit there with your teacher or your group, your circle of fellow students, and you allow the book to awaken certain aspects of the process, the learning process, and you talk about it. You share it. You write out answers to food for thought questions. So Hands of Light isn't just giving you information, it's really inviting you to grapple with what it is to be an energy healer, what healing is really about, and it's giving you a structure that you can try on for size. If it works for you, you can accept it, play with it, grow it, or you can skip over it, move on to the next thing, as many of us often do. So we'll leave this episode at Chapter 4, parallels between how we see ourselves and reality and the Western scientific views. I'm not quite sure how much I want to go into Chapter 4, because a lot of this you can read and it may or may not speak to you. Yes, it's important, but I kind of want to barrel into the meat and potatoes of chakras and levels of the field, and also open up to some of the characterology ideas that are so fundamental to Hands of Light healing, better known as Brennan Healing Science. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll be back for episode 6, and we'll dive in deeper to Hands of Light by Barbara and Brennan. Bye for now.